What is Touhou? Is it a shoot-'em-up series? Is it a side-scroller series? Is it a fighting game series? Well, it's all of those things and a lot more. Touhou itself is produced primarily by one person under the pen name of Sun, over the course of about 27 years and over 30 games, ranging from vertically scrolling shoot-'em-ups to fantasy fighters. While the games themselves tend to stick to certain formats, there's also mangas and a large music collection as well, which if you haven't checked that out yet, you probably should after this video. Odds are, if you've been on the internet, you've likely encountered Touhou in some way or form, even if you didn't realize it. Although it isn't as widespread in the West, it's very popular within Japan. But what is it that makes it so special? To answer that, we need to dive in and take a look at the series as a whole. Before I get started, I want to preface with a few things. This is a brand new series I'm focusing on, as it's probably obvious by now. The IS series. Usually I record long plays and upload them here, without voice commentary. But since this is a variety channel, I'm doing pretty much anything and everything. That's what variety is, after all. And also, I guess this is technically a voice reveal, but if you've been around me in Discord, you know what I sound like already. But without further ado, let's take a look at the Touhou Project series as a whole, and see what makes it so special. Firstly, where does Touhou take place? What is the background of Touhou? Touhou takes place roughly around the Yatsugatake Mountains of Japan. However, in the canon of Touhou, this area has been magically sealed off for centuries. The sealed off land is one of fantasy and magic, and simply known to its inhabitants as GENSOKYO. Though the modern world moves on, GENSOKYO is its own time capsule in a way. It lags behind the modern outside world. Despite having a magical barrier, it's unknown and unstated who created the barrier, though one character is likely to have helped in creating it. In addition to GENSOKYO being magical, many of its inhabitants can use said magic. This ranges anywhere from laughably weak to arguably controlling the laws of reality. Other examples include being able to float out of reality, space-time manipulation, reversing events that will happen via speech, absorbing anything, and kicking leaves?
Huh?
Not only does magic exist in GENSOKYO, so does the paranormal. And by paranormal, I mean yokai. But what exactly are yokai, you ask? Yokai are spirits or ghosts at the most basic level, but it's also a lot more complex than that. An oni, for instance, is like that of a demon or an ogre. And don't worry, Touhou absolutely has these. However, oni are also considered a type of yokai. Poltergeists are also considered yokai. Even vampires, which aren't native to GENSOKYO, are also considered yokai. There are many, many different types of yokai in GENSOKYO. So many, in fact, that they're the dominant thing in GENSOKYO. Other than that, you have fairies, which aren't yokai and are considered to be a part of GENSOKYO itself. Fairies regenerate, but if a spot in GENSOKYO dies, fairies will no longer have a presence there. And then you have these things which no one knows what the lore of is. But what does all that mean for humans living in GENSOKYO? Well, for most humans, they're confined to the special human village. This is important for a few reasons. Firstly, in order for yokai to exist as a whole, humans must be scared of them. yokai thrive on fear. Thus, yokai flock to GENSOKYO in droves. But there's a very special caveat. The humans in the village cannot be harmed in any way. Because yokai live off of fear, if the human village were to collapse, GENSOKYO would also collapse. Since a large number of yokai eat humans to survive, how do yokai survive them? As it turns out, that's not exactly true. Not all yokai eat humans. Most of them do, but not all of them. There's special cases, such as Fugasa Tatara, that lives off of fear and surprise. Apparently that counts as a diet. Kasen Ibaraki, a hermit that is definitely absolutely not an Oni, doesn't even need to eat, hardly at all. She just needs a little mist and she's fine, but she still does have a sweet tooth. As a ghost, Yuyuko Saigyoji doesn't need to eat, but she does anyway. But what about yokai that do eat humans? Well, they can't eat the humans in the village. But one way, if they're strong enough, is to simply exit GENSOKYO by punching a hole in the magical barrier. But that's only if the yokai is strong enough to do so. For most yokai though, that's not an option. They rely on a much more interesting method, called spiriting away. When the border fluctuates, or if a human has simply been forgotten to the outside world, they may enter GENSOKYO. This is the proper way to enter GENSOKYO. Most humans that enter GENSOKYO this way are eaten by yokai, but a few lucky ones might be able to live in the village, or exit GENSOKYO by the help of its inhabitants, such as the Shrine Maiden. Speaking of the Shrine Maiden, there's a few special humans that do live freely in GENSOKYO. While most humans live in the village, not all of them do, such as Reimu Hakure. Reimu is the primary protagonist of Touhou and solves most of the incidents. We'll get to incidents in a moment. Reimu is a character with many abilities, and oftentimes accidentally solves incidents without even trying. You would think she would be the strongest character, but she isn't. Though, admittedly, she might be one of the strongest, but that's up to speculation. Touhou power levels are weird. Her abilities, though they're numerous, include summoning gods, manipulating GENSOKYO's Hakure barrier, and even floating out of reality to the point to where she cannot be hit at all. And, well, a lot more. Reimu lives on the border of GENSOKYO at the Hakure Shrine, and although her job is to exterminate yokai, it seems lately that the shrines attracted more yokai than visitors. Murasa Kurasame is the secondary protagonist of Touhou, and she often tries to compete with Reimu to solve incidents. She's quite eccentric and notably is a kleptomaniac. She'd steal pennies if she could. She's frequently been seen stealing the attacks of other characters and trying to, quote-unquote, improve them. Here's some examples. And, well, I think you get the point by now. Sakuya Izuyoi is a bit of an enigma. Though she's a human, she's especially long-lived. An imperishable knight, Remelia, the vampire she serves, claims it's no longer fitting to call her human since she's lived so long. She has near mastery of control of space-time, though she can't move things back in time. That's actually because she's moving at near light speeds. Tsunai Kochia was originally a human from the outside world that's also a living god. When she moved to GENSOKYO along with the two gods she serves, it caused an incident. She's also a distant descendant of one of them, and can not only summon them to aid her in combat, but she also has the power to cause miracles. Yomu is bizarre, as she's only half human. The other half, which easily stands out, is a phantom. She's incredibly skilled as a swordsman, though, like Reimu, she does tend to slack off. She's the bodyguard of Yuyuko Yoji, a powerful ghost who can control spirits and cause the inevitable death of any person. Yomu wields 2 swords, both of which have special properties. Moko is quite the oddball. She's one of the few characters that have been confirmed to have killed someone, and she's also one of the few humans in GENSOKYO to achieve immortality. Though she can't die, she still feels pain. Over a millennia ago, she stole the Hour Eye Elixir and drank it, turning her immortal as a result. However, there's also other immortals in GENSOKYO that she knows personally. Hieda no Aku, Aku for short, is a special human that never forgets anything she sees. This is both a blessing and a curse. Around every 150 years, a child of Mirai is born. Aku is one of these. While being able to recall everything seen is a blessing, every time a child of Mirai is born, their expected lifespan decreases. She's the 9th one, thus Aku, and it seems like she may pass on soon due to her age. Kasuzu Motori isn't too different from the average human. However, she can decipher any text. She works at Susanoo. Sumireko is an outsider that forced her way into GENSOKYO, kind of. She has psychic powers and once caused an incident that caused a chain reaction of a few other incidents. Though she can't normally enter GENSOKYO, when she dreams, she can. The games in the series usually have a set of protagonists that are basically mainstays. Usually it's Reimu and Murasa, but sometimes others also join in. In fact, 5 of the humans mentioned just a moment ago could be considered mainstays, as well as Raisin. They manipulate sanity and wavelengths to a certain extent. Now, it's time to talk about something I've been holding back on for a bit. Much like a squirrel running through a school library would be an incident, GENSOKYO also has incidents, but on a much larger scale. When the balance of GENSOKYO is upset in some way, whether it's minor or major, an incident's considered to have occurred. Incidents range from harmless to world-threatening, which is a pretty large range. Typically, Reimu or Murasa will solve these, with the former usually taking care of them, but that doesn't stop them competing against one another to solve the incident. Each game focuses on an incident of its own kind. For brevity, I'll briefly go over them, as it'd take far too long to cover each incident in exact detail. It's going to be quite lengthy as is, so grab some popcorn. And spoilers I guess, but I'll try to keep things light. Oh, and one more thing. I don't have any footage for Touhou 1 through 3, as you probably noticed if you know Touhou well enough. Not that that matters. Anyways, on to explaining. The first 5 games aren't on Windows. Instead, they're on the PC98 system. As a result, they're not talked about very frequently, and sometimes they're considered the black sheep of the series. Regardless, they're worth mentioning as they do have some important things about them. Touhou 1, also known as Touhou Highly Responsive to Prayers, was very different compared to the rest of the series, and, well, its gameplay style hasn't been seen since its debut. It was effectively an Arkanoid clone. It also has 2 different routes for the story. The primary cause of the incident was the shrine being destroyed by something. It's not clear what caused it. Touhou 2, also known as Story of Eastern Wonderland, is where traces of modern Touhou start to appear. In this one, you can control Reimu with the arrow buttons, can shoot with Z, and now you can use bombs like normal. Unlike modern Touhou, you can't move slowly with the shift button, and there's also only 5 stages this time. This incident was caused by monsters appearing at the shrine, which in today's canon wouldn't exactly cause an incident considering how... Never mind, that's for another time. This game also has the first extra stage. What's an extra stage? Well, it's time for a small tangent, yet again. Most, if not all, Touhou games are arcade-like in that if you get a game over, there's a continue system. Some of the games have a credit system, where you have a limited number of continues, while others have unlimited continues. When you use a continue, +1 score is added to the score counter. This is also why the minimum score from anything, any action, is 10 points. Replays cannot be saved if continues are used. Thus, if the game is beaten in one go, or 1 credit, it is considered a 1 credit clear, or, for brevity, 1 CC. To access extra stages, i.e. the bonus stage of each game, you must 1 credit clear the main game. Continues cannot be used in extra stages. Anyway, tangent done, back to explaining. Touhou 3, or Phantasmagoria of Dim Dream, was the first versus shmup in the series. It formed the foundation for Phantasmagoria of Flower View, and the more recent Unfinished Dream of All Living Ghosts. Due to its similar nature, it's often compared to Twinkle Star sprites. This incident started when Reimu found some ruins, apparently. Each character battles it out to enter the ruins. Touhou 4, also known as Lotus Land Story, is when the rest of modern Touhou starts to take shape. This time, there are 6 stages instead of 5. Although Touhou 2 has an extra stage, this has more of a proper extra stage. Bizarrely enough, there's 2 versions of Stage 1 depending on if you select Reimu or Murasa. This game also has the first reference to GENSOKYO, via the game title, and the title theme is also the start of the theme of Eastern Story. It's faint, but it's there. The incident, again, is because of monsters swarming the shrine. Touhou 5, Mystic Square, is the final PC98 game, and arguably it's the best one. Reimu, Murasa, Yuka, and Mima are all playable, while this is Alice's first appearance. Once again, the cause of the incident is because monsters have appeared at the shrine. When Touhou 6, Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, was released, it was effectively a reboot of the series. Though most things prior to it aren't mentioned, they are canon unless modern canon conflicts with it, in which case modern canon is correct. With that out of the way, Touhou 6 was the start of Touhou on Windows. In the case of Touhou 6, a red mist has covered GENSOKYO, and its inhabitants are, well, rather annoyed about it. Eventually, they find the source of the problem, the Scarlet Devil Mansion. Later, the area is covered in rain to prevent a certain someone from escaping. Trust me, she'll be relevant much later. Touhou 7 is also known as Perfect Cherry Blossom. At first glance, it seems like an unusually long winter. Throughout the story, the hero makes their way through GENSOKYO into the Netherworld, where the source of the problem is. Eventually, it's revealed that the ruling ghost of the Netherworld, YOUKAI, was trying to steal Spring for herself, somehow, and revive the body under the Great Yokai Cherry Blossom, the Saigyoji Ayakashi. This would have failed regardless, though. And, well, if you've played the game, you'll probably know why. Notably, Alice Margatroyd returns for this entry, and she's one of the 4 characters from the PC98 era to do so. The 7.5th game in the series, wait what? Touhou's weird because the spin-off, or non-mainline games, while canon, are not always a major event. These games take place between the mainline games, with this one in particular taking place between Perfect Cherry Blossom and the next entry in the series. Though Zun works on most games himself, for these decimal games, he usually receives outside help. Make sense? Okay, back to explaining. Immaterial and Missing Power is the 7.5th game in the series. It's also a fighting game, which breaks tradition. After the prior game, something new has cropped up, of course. Feasts keep happening at the shrine every few days, and no one can seem to resist the feast. Strangely, a mist has been seen blanketing them, and no one has commented on it so far. Unlike the prior games thus far, unless you include Touhou 3, which I doubt most people would, there are more than 3 characters that are playable in this game. In this game, you can play up to 11 characters, one of which is Mei Ling. Interestingly enough, Mei Ling isn't normally playable within the story itself. In Imperishable Night, Touhou 8, yokai have sensed that something's wrong with the moon. The Harvest Moon Festival has almost arrived. It's the 8th game, with 8 characters, who split into 4 teams to try to solve the incident. The 4 teams are the Border Team, the Magic Team, the Scarlet Team, and the Netherworld Team. Each team usually consists of 1 human and 1 yokai. This is the only Touhou game in which you have a choice in which final boss you can take on. Additionally, you can play as the characters by themselves, but the game wasn't really designed around it. Phantasmagoria of Flower View is the 9th entry in the series, and similar to Touhou 3, many characters are once again playable. The game's also, yet again, similar to Twinkle Star Sprites because of its format. In this game, spring has arrived in GENSOKYO, but something is, well, off. Flowers of all types seem to be blooming, even those out of season. 16 characters are playable within this entry. Notably, YOUKAI has returned for this entry, making her the last PC98 character to do so. Additionally, for nearly half of the cast, this is the only time they have been playable. Moving on, the 9.5th entry in the series is Shoot the Bullet, and yet again, it deviates from normal. This time, IS Touhou travels GENSOKYO to take photos for her newspaper. Her camera can delete bullets, but she has to take photos of the bosses to proceed, which in some cases can be really tough. Originally, content updates were planned for the game, but this never happened. Back to form with the 10th entry, the Hakurei Shrine now has competition. In Mountain of Faith, the god of the new shrine, the Moria Shrine, basically says the Hakurei Shrine should just close down and give up. This game and the next few games are related, and I'd like to call this era the Religious War arc. About a year after the previous entry, the 10.5th entry, Scarlet Weather Rhapsody, finally happens. It's the middle of summer and strange weather is occurring throughout GENSOKYO. The cast tries to put a stop to things, and some do with moderate success, while others just kind of do their own thing. Subterranean Animism, the 11th entry in the series, is connected to the 10th one. Remember that new god that moved to the top of the mountain? Well, someone asked to be granted power in return for something. Geysers are erupting in the middle of winter, and they've brought spirits with them. But far, far below GENSOKYO, an idiot with a burning desire to rule the surface plots something. Touhou UFO, the 12th entry. Guess what? It's connected to the previous one. Remember those geysers? Yeah, well, a ship that was stuck underground for a few hundred years was not only shot into the air, but is now flying. Not only that, but its seemingly long-lived yokai crew is on a rescue mission. The protagonist learned one way or another, for the first time since the PC98 era, Makai is revisited. Additionally, this is the first time that Sanai Kochiya is playable. This game also has a lot of references to Buddhism. Touhou Hisoten Soku, Soku for short, is the 12.3rd entry in the series, and it's a sequel of sorts to the previous fighting game. In the story of Soku, a giant has been seen wandering GENSOKYO, and each of the 3 protagonists think it's something different. Each of them set out to see what this thing really is. Double Spoiler is the 12.5th game in the series. It's a sequel to Shoot the Bullet, and its gameplay and plot is nearly the same. But this time, Aya's rival is introduced. You can also play as her, but you have to progress pretty far in the story to do that. Great Fairy Wars is the 12.8th game in the series, and it revolves around Cherno going to war with 3 other fairies in particular. This game is a link to the manga of Touhou Sengetsusei. God, I hope I pronounced that correctly. And in this game, you play as Cherno and freeze bullets while trying to take revenge for Cherno's destroyed... house? Igloo. The word I'm looking for is igloo. You also get to fight Murasa in the extra stage, provided you even make it to her in the first place. Remember Undefined Fantastic Object, UFO? Well, this is the final link in that chain of events. Touhou 13, also known as 10 Desires, is when Byakuren Hijiri decided to place her temple above a mausoleum. However, this didn't come without an unintended consequence. It leads to the revival of Toyosato Mimi no Miko, who is the true identity of Prince Shoutoku. Thus, with this game, Taoism, Buddhism, and Shintoism are now all represented as religions within GENSOKYO. Also, this game finally wraps up the religious war arc. Touhou doesn't have many overarching plots or incidents, but this is one of them. Hopeless Masquerade is the 13.5th installment in the series. Due to so many incidents occurring, GENSOKYO's human village has gotten a case of the Big Sad. Meanwhile, a yokai has lost one of its masks, the Mask of Hope. Double-dealing character is series entry 14. The yokai of GENSOKYO have finally had enough. They want to turn society on its head and be the rulers for once. Meanwhile, strange things with Tsukumogami are happening in GENSOKYO. Impossible Spell Card is the 14.3rd entry in the series. GENSOKYO's local Amano-jaku has been cheating in spell card duels, and throughout the game, many characters attempt to stop her. They use spell cards that are considered impossible to dodge. They aren't actually impossible, just really difficult. In the 14.5th game, Urban Legend in Limbo, a high school student in the outside world who is interested in the occult attempts to enter GENSOKYO. She manages to do so, but not without consequences and other unforeseen outcomes. Touhou 15, Legacy of Lunatic Kingdom, is often regarded as being one of the hardest games in the series. Due to the high school girl's actions, some shenanigans later with occult balls, as well as some figures plotting revenge on a certain someone, GENSOKYO is under an all-out attack from Lunarians. In the 15.5th entry, Antinomy of Common Flowers, the shenanigans caused by the high school student aren't done quite yet, though this will be the end of that chain of events. This time, she gets to play a role in the incident on both sides. Well, thrice actually. Don't ask me how that works. Rumors in GENSOKYO have started being manifested into power. In the 16th entry, Hidden Star and Four Seasons, the seasons of GENSOKYO are out of whack. Meanwhile, everyone does the best they can to find the cause of the incident. In the 16.5th entry, Violet Detector, the high school student Sumi Reko can enter GENSOKYO through her dreams. Much like Ayesha Mimaru, she decided to start taking photos of GENSOKYO's residents. In the 17th entry, Wily Beast and Weakest Creature, beastly spirits from hell are trying to take over the surface for unknown reasons. The heroes do their best to investigate and try to resist the beast spirits, but some interesting things happen along the way. The 17.5th entry, Sunken Fossil World, is, well, more of a critique on the modern world than anything. In the case of 17.5, oil has become an issue in GENSOKYO, yet the characters don't really seem to know what it is. The source behind the oil, however, and who is behind it is far more dangerous. All of the characters who have tried to stop her have failed, save for an unlikely hero, a certain someone, an embodiment of Scarlet Devil. In Unconnected Marketeers, the 18th entry in the series, cards with mysterious powers have popped up in GENSOKYO. It seems to be harmless on the surface, but just to be sure, it's worth looking into. 100th Black Market, the 18.5th entry in the series, has the card hype slowly dying down, but there is some resistance to this card hype dying down, of course. In Touhou 19, Unfinished Dream of All Living Ghosts, after the Market God returned all to nothing, GENSOKYO goes into a scramble trying to retake the lands. All of this will happen naturally, unknown to most of the residents. Some, however, will try to take GENSOKYO for themselves. This ties in and wraps up both Wily Beast and Weakest Creature and Unconnected Marketeers. Probably. And that brings us to the current point of the series. But of course, what would a good series be without bugs? There is quite a few, but I'll only go over a few notable bugs. An embodiment of Scarlet Devil, on Windows 10 or later, the game will run at extremely high frame rates, making the game effectively unplayable. Thankfully, this can be fixed with a certain tool called the ENB converter, i.e. DirectX 8 to 9. In Mountain of Faith, when playing as Murasa Shot Type B, when you're unfocused and have between 3 and 3.95 power, Murasa will do far more damage than intended, practically melting any boss that vaguely looks in her direction. In Double Dealing character, Sakuya can overflow the score counter, not because she's good, she's not great in this game, but because Zun's code is just jank. Though, to be fair, coding itself is pretty hard, so I guess he can get a pass for this one. In Perfect Cherry Blossom, in Merlin's final spell card, sometimes she'll just bug out and do her own thing. I have yet to see this happen myself, but supposedly this is due to an overflow error. In Touhou 19, Unfinished Dream of All Living Creatures, if too many of Hisami's lasers are spawned, the game will instantly crash. I have no idea why this happens, it just does. And there's many other bugs that I won't list, but most are really small or funny. There's plenty that you might come across yourself, but it's rare that you'll find some of them at all. That took a lot longer than I thought it would. Now then, with those lengthy explanations done, you're probably wondering, how are these incidents resolved? Well, it's time to introduce Spellcards and Danmaku. Within lore, each participant must declare the winning and losing conditions for a match. Within gameplay, however, typically it's just winning against the opponent and not dying too much. As for the how part of the equation, that's the job of Danmaku and Spellcards. Danmaku, which translates almost literally to bullet curtain, is a form of magic in which characters, well, fire bullets at one another. These bullets are magical and typically aren't lethal. Usually. It's more for show than anything, and I suppose it could be considered a form of martial arts in a way. Though, to be fair, characters usually fight each other in a number of ways, so maybe martial arts isn't exactly the most accurate term. This is the main means for how characters battle one another and settle conflicts, but there's also a much more interesting and complex component to settling these duels: Spellcards. Spellcards are an advanced form of Danmaku. Typically, these are special patterns that either look pretty or are quite difficult. Sometimes it's both. They're named attacks and must be declared by the user. Before each battle, the participants must declare how many spellcards are used and must be captured, and so on. Spellcards also usually have a special background to indicate that a spellcard is in use. They may also have a portrait of the character briefly appear to indicate that the spellcard is starting. Though spellcards do not always have rules, there is usually a form of etiquette. For example, the card usually must be dodgeable in some form or another. Additionally, another goal may just be to make the attack a brilliant spectacle to look at. There's hundreds of spellcards within the series itself, and they're presented in different contexts, even sometimes out of battles. In Perfect Memento and Strict Sense, one of the Touhou mangas, it's revealed that none other than the main series protagonist Reimu Hakare pioneered the spellcard system, and first used it in Embodiment of Scarlet Devil. Regardless, spellcards are cool, and here's some examples of spellcards that I find interesting. Just Danmaku in general can look cool. Not all of them, mind you, but some are pretty cool. The community tends to call attacks that are not spell cards non-spells. Shocking, I know. In addition to normal spell cards, in 2 of the games, there are special types of spell cards, Last Words and Overdrive cards, respectively. With Last Words, certain conditions must be met to unlock these spell cards. Both of these types of spell cards are incredibly difficult cards that are usually ultimate attacks of sorts. Touhou's dialogue and story is far from a literary masterpiece. Though certain plots in Touhou can be rather minimal, not all of them are, and the games themselves are just a delivery medium for Zun to present his ideas. Besides the gameplay itself, being one of these mechanisms, usually having the player make their way through the stages and battling bosses, there's also dialogue between battles most of the time. Some dialogue ranges from outright dumb to surprisingly profound. When Reimu first meets Sakia, Sakia claims the mistress rarely meets with people. This is because the mistress, Remelia Scarlet, is a vampire that tends to only be awake at night, and the mansion itself rarely has visitors. In Reimu's infinite wisdom, she asks, is she under house arrest? Though, to be fair, she wouldn't have known anyway. In Murasa's scenario of embodiment of Scarlet Devil, when she encounters Rumia, Rumia T-poses. When Murasa asks why Rumia is doing that, she replies, doesn't it remind you of a saint crucified on a cross? In response, Murasa replies something along the lines of, it looks like humanity started learning how to count. Though this joke obviously doesn't translate well into other languages, it works really well if you know how to read Japanese. The cross symbol is coincidentally the kanji for the number 10. Later, in Murasa's extra stage, she encounters Flandre. Flandre breaks the 4th wall and states that the player cannot use a continue. Of course, this checks out, as this is an extra stage. In Sanai Shot Type B's scenario in Undefined Fantastic Object, Sanai mentions charms with P and points written on them. This is interesting because it implies power and point items are canon. In Unconnected Marketeers, Sakia says, remind me what oxygen is. Though this area is devoid of oxygen and she may be suffering because of that, some fans have interpreted this as her being an idiot or playing dumb. Despite this, she apparently knows what thorium decay products are. And then there's this one, which is great out of context. Really, there's so much dialogue that's context and story dependent, I just can't do it justice. One thing to note though, is that while much of the early dialogue is rather ridiculous, it seems to have vastly improved in the later games. The earlier games seem to be more carefree, if that's your thing. The later games are much more established and take themselves much more seriously. Though, not too seriously, usually. Though I briefly touched on them earlier, certain games, such as the Decimal games, are spin-offs. While most of the Decimal games are not mainline, they are canon. There are exceptions to this, however, that have had Zun's involvement. The fighting games, for instance, have outside help for things such as art and programming mechanics. Zun still does some of the music, though. There are also other games and fan games, such as Uwabami Breakers and Touhou Unreal Mahjong, that have had outside help from Zun. For the most part, though, the spin-offs are made entirely by Zun, despite them taking place between the mainline games and having a weird decimal spot. Spin-off games tend to be either fighting games, or games that deviate too much from the normal formula for the Touhou project. For instance, Sunken Fossil World is a fighting game that's also partly a platform, that focuses on gathering water and oil to boost the player's attacks. Great Fairy Wars, for instance, is a part of one of the manga series and focuses on the player exploring different routes as Cherno while freezing bullets to make progress. Violet Detector is a shmup that also focuses on Sumi Reko using her camera to take photos of Danmaku. The possibilities are literally 13. Endless. Then, of course, there's the PC98 Games, which is where Touhou started. It started as an Arkanoid clone that slowly evolved into the shmup that it is now. Earlier games didn't even have the option to slow down, nor did they have a visible hitbox for the player character. Though neither does Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, so make of that what you will. The canon of PC98 Games is also rather dubious. Zun has previously stated if that the canon between these games and the modern games conflict, then the modern games will take precedence. While they still happen, it's just that they're not likely to ever be mentioned again. Sorry, Mima. And on that note, characters. The characters of Touhou tend to be rather simple on the surface, but much more complex underneath. Let's take a look at some for example's sake. Sakia's main motives are often those that help or are for her mistress Romelia Scarlet, or her sister, Flandre Scarlet. Originally, she was a vampire hunter. One fateful night, she encountered Romelia, and from there her fate was changed. It's unknown how or when this happened. From Zun's emails, we know that Sakia Izuyoi is not her real name, and is instead one given to her by Romelia Scarlet. Odds are, she may no longer even know what her original name even was. From this, we also know that she isn't from GENSOKYO, but that's kind of a given, as the rest of the Scarlet Devil Mansion cast isn't either. If you know anything about Sakia, it's that she can manipulate time. But did you know that she can also manipulate space as well? But exactly how does she accomplish this? Well, what if I told you that she isn't actually stopping time at all? What Sakia actually does is that she moves so fast with such little mass, it appears that she's stopped time. However, this doesn't really explain her ability to manipulate space, but one could argue that this branches from the fact that they can manipulate time since they're related. Oddly enough, she doesn't fire her knives just from anywhere. She actually has a large possession of knives that manually get placed when time is stopped. It sounds tedious, but I guess it's part of being a maid in GENSOKYO. Though fairy maids are employed at the Scarlet Devil Mansion, Saki is the one that does most of the work. But with fairy maids, who handles the food? Well, again, it's Sakia. Though it's likely that there is food in the mansion's garden, food is primarily gathered by the hands of Sakia. The tea is made of blood, and the pastries are made of flesh. That's right, Sakia hunts humans. Or at least probably. It's likely that she goes after those who've spirited away into GENSOKYO as a supply of meat. But with that said, she has been shopping in the human village before, so the possibility of long pork isn't exactly 100%. But with her serving vampires, maybe it might be true after all. Sakia has served Romelia Scarlet for so long, that even she has questioned if it's even fitting to call Sakia human. Though she's said to play the role of a maid somewhere between 10 and 20 years old, it isn't only implied, but it's rather obvious that she's way older than that. What kind of person looks this young with gray hair? I mean, come on. You could dye it, sure, but I don't think hair dye really exists in GENSOKYO, considering the circumstances in which GENSOKYO exists. Moving on, Okina Matara is arguably one of the most important characters in the series, and she fills several important roles. She's older than even GENSOKYO itself, much like some other characters. She's also based on the legendary Matara Jin. Since she is based on this figure, she is therefore a god of many things, such as secrecy, the disabled, seasons, no, repelling evil such as Tengu, and so on. Let's talk about some of these things. Firstly, she's a god of the disabled. In some of her sprites and portraits, Okina can be sitting down. This is the entire reason for that. Probably. That, or she really just wants to relax, and I don't blame her if that's true. She is also a god of No. No is a dance in theatrical form. I won't elaborate much on it as I don't know a lot about it, but most importantly, masks are used. This is important for another character in the series as well, but it's also something Matara-jin is associated with. She is also a god of seasons. Yes, every season. Including the border between seasons, apparently. One of the things I also mentioned is that she's a god of secrecy. But why would Okina need to be sworn to secrecy? As a god, wouldn't you want to be known? Well, yes. And she most certainly is known, but the secrecy part is on purpose. Okina is a sage of GENSOKYO. What does that mean, you ask? The sages of GENSOKYO, also known as the misnomer of the yokai sages, are a group of characters that are responsible for creating GENSOKYO and help keep its balance. This group is the one that created the Hakure Berry. Interestingly, GENSOKYO has one supreme god above all others, the Dragon God. Since GENSOKYO's creation, it was the last time it was seen. The moon also has the lunar capital, but it's also known as the Dragon Palace. Bizarrely enough, most characters are not aware of this and think the Dragon Palace is under the sea. This has some rather interesting lore implications that I won't get into though. Tangent aside, these sages swore to protect GENSOKYO. So far, there are only a few known members, consisting of Hasan Ibaraki, Yukari Yakumo, and Okina Matara herself. Therefore, it would make sense that she would conceal herself in secrecy to aid GENSOKYO. But how does she accomplish her goals? This is where things get a bit strange, as Touhou often does when you delve deep enough into it. As a god of many things, she can manipulate life force and manipulate mental energy. Sure, that's strong and terrifying on its own, but Okina can also create backdoors? Why would Okina be able to do that? Because Okina is based on Matara-jin, and certain groups worship them in the back of temples, this ability sure does exist. This ability, then, was loosely based on that fact, and then taken to the extreme. To push this further, Okina can create backdoors on anything. Commonly, however, this is taken literally, and these backdoors are literal backdoors. These backdoors act as portals, and they can also, as an extension of Okina, slightly manipulate life force and energy. And Seasons 2, I guess, but we'll get to that in a moment. Entering a backdoor will take you to the very creatively named Land of Backdoors. This is Okina's personal pocket dimension that she and her two servants live in. From here, as long as a backdoor exists somewhere, she can travel freely to anywhere in GENSOKYO that she pleases. Much about the location itself remains unknown, though. Okina's role as a protagonist or antagonist can be argued to be rather ambiguous, much like Yukari Yakumo, though the method to accomplishing their goals are very different. Let's take a small peek into some of their appearances. Okina's first appearance was in Hidden Star in 4 Seasons. She appeared first as the final boss, having manipulated the seasons of GENSOKYO to let GENSOKYO subtly know that she existed. This was also for the purpose of looking for new servants. However, when the hero first finds them, it is discovered that the entire game was rigged, and the seasonal energy they had been collecting had been trapped. Eventually, they either run away or are ejected by a release of seasonal energy via the back doors. In the extra stage, they had collected the boundary between seasons to play Okina at her own game, which worked as Okina could not manipulate it. However, Okina could have drawn from another source of power, but she decided to play fair, as the hero was quite smart about this. In Sunken Fossil World, Okina was the one that caused the incident intentionally, so she could take control of the oil. However, this seemingly was in good intentions, as she didn't want anyone to do anything with it. This was also to make others aware of the looming threat of Yuma Totetsu. She also had a role in some of the mangas in Violet Detector, but I'd rather not spoil those, as those are far too interesting to discuss here. Siren is a former Luna rabbit that fled to GENSOKYO. She now works as a dango saleswoman. That doesn't sound too interesting on the surface, but it does get better. Firing bullets from nowhere, which is Siren's ability to fire bullets from seemingly nowhere, is something rather weird. While other characters can fire bullets themselves, Siren doesn't even have to do that. It's unknown exactly how this ability works, but we do know that somehow these bullets come from entirely different dimensions. It sounds strong, but it's really not that great as an ability. Siren herself fled to GENSOKYO in the Legacy of Lunatic Kingdom incident. This is likely also about the time she became a saleswoman. She's a rival with Ringo, another former Luna rabbit that also sells dango. I guess there's always competition in GENSOKYO. One thing your eyes probably immediately notice when you see Siren is her mallet. Though you may at first glance assume it's blood, it's actually blotches of leftover pounded mochi, which is a lot less dark when put that way. This is related to Japanese mythology itself and rabbits pounding mochi. Supposedly, this mallet can also fire Danmaku too. Wonder if it's any good for construction though. Notably, in Touhou 19, she found a jewel that would create paradise for moon rabbits in GENSOKYO. Even after abandoning the moon, she still cares about her fellow moon rabbits. How sweet. Nue Hoju is a bit of an enigma. Though she herself is based on the yokai Nue, she doesn't really look the part. Since more modern times, she's recently been mistaken for an alien more often than not. Her ability is to make things unidentifiable. While that's cool, it's not also that useful. This was used in the Undefined Fantastic Object incident for the Seeds of Unknown Form. This is why the player sees them as UFOs. All in all, she's just a typical yokai that likes to scare others, so while her design and background is cool, she doesn't really have a ton going for her. She does appear frequently compared to other characters, so I guess she's got that going for her, at least. And of course, that's only a few characters. That's just scratching the surface. Touhou has over 180 characters, and all of them are unique and interesting in one way or another. I really don't think I'm doing them justice. Touhou music has often been described by its fans as its own genre. If you're not sure what that means by now, all of the music played thus far has been selections of music from the series. But let's take a listen to a few select more, including the more popular ones and ones that I find interesting personally. There's also a few interesting things about Touhou music that Zun likes to do. Take a listen. Did you catch it? There's two very peculiar things that Zun does. Firstly, Touhou has a leitmotif. You can find it in a good chunk of the songs, and the title themes almost always have it. This leitmotif is known as the theme of Eastern Story, and it can be found frequently throughout the games. There's also one more thing that Zun does, a very specific chord progression that is used frequently. This progression is VI, VII, I. This progression is so common that the community tends to refer to it as something like the Touhou chord progression. While I don't know much about the music theory itself, the progression is ridiculously common. Touhou stages are designed around the music, not the other way around. When you're going through the stages, you may notice how well timed everything is. Or perhaps you may not notice it at all if it's seamless enough. It's very noticeable in Legacy of Lunatic Kingdom, however, as it was designed around it more so than usual in that game. When tension rises, it's usually an indicator that things are about to get more difficult or a strong enemy or boss has appeared. Here's some examples of this. Hopefully you can see what I mean by that now. I would say that each game is carefully crafted, but lately some of the mainline games have felt a bit lackluster with how unbalanced some of the attacks are. With that said, I think it holds true for the most part. Additionally, music rooms are always in the mainline games. In these music rooms, you can just listen to the music of the game whenever. Zun also gives comments and thoughts about the music as he made them or what he thinks of them. If you haven't checked any of the music rooms out in the games, go check them out. It's worth your time. And speaking of which, Zun also has music collections, such as Dawson's Pseudo Paradise or Magical Astronomy. I won't be sampling those as they're notorious for copyright shenanigans, but go give them a listen, they're fantastic. As with many Japanese series, Touhou also has manga. Many, in fact. Some of which are partly fan-made as well. One of the most recent, Foul Detective Satori, focuses around the mind-reading yokai Satori Komeiji playing the role of a detective. When the residents of GENSOKYO are completely bewildered and stumped by an incident, Satori steps up and sees what she can do to solve it. In Forbidden Scrollery, the story focuses on Kasuzu Motori and her bookstore of Suzunan. Through the story, and many shenanigans, she attracts the attention of incident resolvers because of the going-ons and what's happening at her store. Inaba of the Moon and Inaba of the Earth is a manga that doesn't take itself too seriously, and is home to many humorous situations. Because of this though, the canonness of the manga is rather dubious. Despite that, it's still official, and remains one of my favorite Touhou manga to date. Zun was only loosely involved with this manga's creation, however, so take that information how you will. So, what do I think of Touhou? It's a really interesting series that uses games as a medium to show off Zun's music and other ideas. I find it fascinating how he seemingly just keeps going and expanding the idea of Touhou in general. Though he has kids now and his work is slowed down, that doesn't really mean his works are worse. If you haven't tried Touhou, or have delved into Touhou, I recommend doing so. It's very easy to get lost in, the gameplay is fun, and the community is surprisingly welcoming. There's plenty of fan works that are allowed to exist due to the lenience of the author, but I ultimately decided to not cover them due to not knowing enough about them. That and memes as well, but that's where stuff starts to get weird. But I do have a little experience with that stuff. If you've never played a bullet hell, the games are rather difficult, but any point to start at is a good one. All in all, I'm glad that I found the series. It's been nearly 8 years now, and I'm probably going to keep enjoying Touhou for a long time.